Want to shop Walmart Black Friday deals first? Walmart Plus members get early access to our hottest deals. Join now and get 50% off a 1-year annual membership. Shop Black Friday deals first with Walmart Plus. See terms at walmartplus.com.
When you share your food, you share your heart. So what's on your table this holiday season? Save on your festive feast at Kroger with delicious deals on all the holiday classics. Or wow the crowd with something new, like a quinoa stuffed butternut squash. It's sure to add a pop of color to your spread. How about a sweet potato casserole with a crunchy oat streusel topping, made with care for the sweet tooth and the savory tooth? With Kroger, fill your table with love and watch as your guests' hearts get as full as their bellies. Kroger, fresh for everyone.
For over 50 years, Burlington's legacy has been great deals on coats for all weather conditions. So before you're caught unprepared for the winter weather, head to Burlington for name brands, quality items, and surprising fits for every family member. Stock up on coats, sweaters, and accessories before the cold hits, so you can finally stop avoiding the elements and start living comfortably. Warm up at your nearest Burlington location less than 1 mile away. Burlington. Deals, brands, wow.
The infiltration of the Asteri's Crystal Palace quickly goes awry when Bryce takes a detour in the archives in search for truth, and Ruhn leaves Hunt to save Agent Daybright from the dungeons. Meanwhile, Tharion escapes the lab in Pangera when he realizes Cormac's plan to sacrifice himself to kill Pippa Spetsos and thwart the rebels and Asteri's chances of using the mechsuit prototypes. When Ruhn, Bryce, and Hunt are inevitably caught, Lidia Cervos kills the Harpy to save them from her ministrations, only for them to find that they played right into Rigelus' hands and land in his trap, one that requires sacrifice and goodbyes in order for Bryce to escape with the truth and newfound conviction to raise Hell's armies and kill the Asteri.
The views expressed by the hosts are entirely their own and in no way represent the thoughts or intentions of the original author.
This podcast is a discussion, shared to spark thought and conversation on the characters and themes of this novel.
The interpretations presented in this podcast are just a few of many possibilities. Listeners are encouraged to read along and share their own analysis of the text.
Though the hosts speak mostly within the constraints of this book, series and extended universe spoilers may be discussed with or without warning.
Explicit language, as well as themes of sex, violence, abuse, depression, self-harm, and death will recur throughout this podcast. Listener discretion is advised.
If you are enjoying the podcast, check out our Patreon for more exclusive content. You can find us at patreon.com/Book Talk for Book Talk.
Welcome to Book Talk for Book Talk with Jac and Amy, a podcast where we deep dive into the writings of your favorite novels.
This season, we are exploring Sarah J. Maas's second installment in the Crescent City series.
This is Jac.
And I'm Amy.
This week we're discussing chapters 72 through the epilogue in our final episode covering House of Sky and Breath.
The question we ask ourselves this week is, to what extent are we satisfied with the transition from Earth and Blood to Sky and Breath, and again to Flame and Shadow at this point in the Crescent City series?
Themes we'll see in this section include loss of freedom as well as weaving together all of the Maasverse threads. Stick around for a very special announcement at the end of the episode. I even grant you permission to just jump to the end and then come right back.
Actually, you can't do that because the announcement's not till Thursday's episode.
That's so unfortunate for the beginning of the Tuesday people. All right. Anyways, let's get into this.
So we start chapter 72 with anxiety. There is a lot of time pressure on our characters, and that is portrayed in the narrative. Each perspective, even though we're switching between Hunt and Bryce and Hunt, we get a counting down of minutes. The first perspective from Hunt says Bryce has 2 minutes left. And then Bryce's perspective says she's got a minute or two to spare. And then Hunt's perspective again is Ruhn's been gone for 3 minutes. And it just builds a lot of tension for the reader. And I don't know about you, but I feel the anxiety that Hunt feels right now.
My minutes don't equal their minutes. I swear. She's like, I've got 2 minutes to spare. If I put something in the microwave and I know I have 2 minutes, it manages to disappear very quickly. I would not be able to.
Oh, really?
Yeah, there's no world I could go run into something and check out the Asteri master plan in 2 minutes and then come right back out.
I feel like microwave minutes are the longest minutes in the universe.
All right, we'll have to test this. We'll put it on the microwave. One of the things I love about how tense this section is, because like you called it, it's very tense. Everyone is like 2 minutes left, 1 minute left. But there's a reason to that. It's because SJM is making very stylistic choices in her writing. So if you're noticing, the chapters are a lot shorter. They're like 2 pages sometimes. Okay, not 1 page, but like 2 or 3 pages, very short. And then even the descriptions are much shorter. If you think about earlier in the book, there's a lot of descriptions that she gets like very flowery with the descriptions. This time, she is cutting straight to the chase. Like, we are not spending time here on Hunt's abs. Like, we are going straight into action, drama, and I think that this is very classic SJM. We've talked about this in our ACOTAR seasons. We talked about this in House of Earth and Blood, pure SJM.
Can I provide one small correction?
No, but okay.
I think you mean scenes, because not all the chapters are actually short, but the scenes are really short.
No, the chapters are like 2 pages. Some of the chapters are really short.
Okay. I only remember one of them being short.
No,
but that's just me.
I was counting down.
Okay, I believe you. Ignore me. Cut this all out.
No, keep it all in. Make editing easier. But when you think about, like, even if a chapter is like 3 or 4 pages, it's nothing compared to like some of the 10, 15, 20 pagers that we've had in the past with her.
Yes, you're completely correct on that front.
Somehow I'll navigate this conversation so that I get that said at the very end of the... Bryce has always been a confident character, though. Like, that's kind of like her shtick. And she's not thrown off by much. But right here, we're seeing her, quote, bile burned her throat. And that's something that we saw a lot in ACOTAR with Farah. And it was used then to humanize a character. And I think that SJM didn't need to do that because Bryce was so distinctly human. But now we're seeing more of that. And it's almost like, oh, we should take this very seriously because Bryce is feeling sick, so therefore I feel sick. And then Bryce takes a detour to the archives because, quote, the door handles seem to gleam. And like, okay, yes, is the starlight guiding her? We saw it with the people that's around her, you know, and she's like, oh, look, my star, the gleaming, go there. I also think it could be Rigelus, like, you know, telling her, being like, hey, over here. Like, I mean, she's so easy to trick, obviously. And then now it's like you just have a glow in the dark handle. And then she's like, what's that one?
Well, and we're about to see how Rigelus has played them all like little pawns. So I think that's a great point.
Maybe we don't go towards the glowing door handle. But it says dusk, right? And so she was like, dusk's truth. I'd be such a bad heroine. I'd skip all of this. I would be like, found it, going home, bye.
Bye. Now, we should continue to be anxious because Bryce is taking that detour and Ruhn, on his side of the palace, is thinking, you know what? It's too quiet. And yeah, you're right, Ruhn. It is too quiet. Why haven't you guys been intercepted yet? Despite all this, quote, the hall opened into a wide fork. To the left lay the dungeons, to the right, the stairs up to the palace proper. He went left without hesitation, down the stairs that turned from cloudy quartz to dark stone, like the life had been sucked from the rock. Now, I bring this quote up for a couple of reasons. First off, the stone walls are symbolic. We have a place of white, and white, the color often being associated with the Asteri and their facade of goodness. And the white, as they go underground, turns into dark rock, or the dark underbelly of what the Asteri are and what they do, especially to those who oppose them. I actually called out this quote more specifically because I feel like it's a metaphor for all of Ruhn's life choices. He's always going to shun royalty. He's not going to take the stairs to the palace. He's not going to follow his princely heritage. Instead, he's going to go against the grain. He's going to do what's not expected of him. And we as readers expect him to avoid his royalness, the palace-ness of his life. So it's no surprise that without hesitation, he's going to go to the dungeon where he thinks Day is, which is also kind of his entire life.
Right. And some might say it's where he belongs. I don't know.
No.
We'll have a lot of talk around that. Hunt is left alone by Bryce, by Ruhn. He is now just standing there, and I think that this is his biggest torture. This is Hunt's hell, because he can't do anything to help. He can't be a protector to Bryce. He can't go and assist Ruhn. He is trapped doing nothing, and I think that like that also adds to his own paranoia too, and his own countdown of like, everyone's disappearing, like everyone's gone. What am I doing? And like the only reason why he doesn't go after Bryce is because of a text from Declan being like, "She cool, bro." It's a shame.
It's a real shame.
You know what's another shame? It's Cormac. Mac Daddy got done so dirty here. I feel so bad for him. I forgot about this part where he goes and kills a bunch of innocent people. That wasn't his finest moment, understandably. But he goes in, he's there with Tharion, he's at the base, and he just like starts taking scientists out left and right. And Tharion, you know, who's not really known for the voice of reason, is like, "Hey man, that seems like not a good idea. Like, I thought you said limited casualties." It just kind of harkens back to like the beginning of the book with Sophie, who also went absolute apeshit with the Dreadwolves in the prologue. And everything that Cormac is doing here is in imitation of Sophie. So dare I say that maybe Tharion is Emil?
Oh,
I don't know.
no, I'm really jarred by this because you might be right.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I mean, okay, let me run by this. Emil's lost and confused. He's basically a child, if Tharion is a child, and he's just looking for a home. Look at it. Made that connection. Boom.
Wow.
Did it. Analysis. Like Sophie, to Cormac and to Emil, you know, Sophie was like, "Run," and Cormac tells Tharion to run. Quote, Cormac hadn't just gone rogue. He never intended to get out of here alive. And it confirms what we thought last week, that, yeah, SJM had the clues telling us that Cormac never wanted to live. He never was going to survive this. And it feels very, very Sophie. And it makes me very sad. Poor Mac Daddy.
Rest in peace, Mac Daddy. Bryce, as Jac mentioned, finds a door marked dusk, and she thinks, quote, she had Declan to thank for the dead electronic keypad. I'm guessing not. I'm guessing this is a trap, thanks to Rigelus and company.
We can't help stupid, Amy, and that's okay. Like just like how these idiots are like, everything in the palace is super secure except for the cameras.
Huh. I wonder how that works.
Yeah.
Bryce discovers in this room called Dusk that there are a bunch of star maps and planets that have been labeled and notes taken about them. There are 2 planets that are named before Bryce sees Midgard on the map that the Asteris have charted. The first one is Renthar, which is potentially Hindi for renter, which was conquered but with limited power supply, therefore terminated after 7 years, which, you know what? Why do you have to terminate a place if you're not going to use it? Like, that's so unnecessary.
Yeah, they really are good bad guys.
They're very good at being bad.
Yeah.
There's then Ifraxia, conquered and lost in 40 years, and some listeners hypothesize that this is the Throne of Glass world. I want to note that because Ifraxia was lost in 720 AE, whatever AE means, Midgard was conquered more than 16,000 years later in 17,003 AE. I bring this up because later, Rigelus is going to say, quote, they did not see the old enemy who offered a hand through space and time. They walked through the gates to Midgard at our invitation, leaving behind the world they knew. Now, I know it says space and time, but we don't know what that time frame is. I'm going to guess, though, given that it was like 16,000 years and then it's been 15,000 years since then, we're dealing in the thousands.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't realize that Ifraxia was Throne of Glass world. Like, I remember people suspected it, but I didn't realize it was that name.
I don't know that it's confirmed. It's
not confirmed, but I want you to know I checked Reddit. So
and everyone thinks that it's Throne
there
of
was
Glass.
One thread that did, yes.
Okay.
I only checked one thread, so I don't know.
We also get clues on how to defeat the Asteri throughout the scene. Time and time again, there are references to being united. Quote, we lost many to their united front. Or when it comes to hell, quote, Once warring factions, the royal armies of hell united and marched against us. So all super important information. It's making Bryce sick to her stomach, but it's good for us to know as we prepare to go into Flame and Shadow.
I can't take it. I mean, I'm taking it seriously, but I just like, you'd think they have a better filing system, the Asteri, rather than some kind of like whiteboard where every like notes and everything are up there. Like the way that it's presented is as if they come at the end of every day to like strategize on, you know, what do they learn differently. I don't think that they're making any moves like this. Like I don't but okay, you know, like again, more of a trap, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But hell at this point, you know, because there's like a little bit of everything in hell's mentioned there. And they call hell the mighty creatures of the night. And you can tell there's a little bit of respect to their enemy there, especially since hell's the one that keeps trying to come after them. However, we do get a little bit of a conclusion here that I personally question. Bryce says, quote, "The demon princes had felt a moral obligation to chase after the Asteri so that they might never prey upon another world, to spare others." I feel like it's a little bit of a leap, the reasoning. It could be revenge.
Mm-hmm.
And just, you know, making sure that the Asteri don't come back to their world. I'm just saying that because it's like described that like Bryce starts tearing up thinking about this, that like, wow, hell refuses to let any other planet to go what they went through. And that's not what we've learned. And that kind of comes with, I feel like, third person narrative that the author needs the reader to come to a conclusion. So it's going to be inserted in there. That's my opinion. And I know a lot of times people prefer or think third person is like the better crafted story. But like when I was reading this, I was like, oh, I actually think that if this was first person, Bryce might not have come to that conclusion. But maybe she did. I don't know.
I love your point. I want to argue that maybe Bryce is starting to develop noble reasoning for why she needs to fight the Asteri, and therefore she's projecting that noble moral obligation onto the princes of hell. And I think we see it here, and we're going to see it again later. So I'm going to call out what is important right now. Quote, Jorganus, children were ideal nutrition, adults incompatible. Quote, children proved hardy, but did not take to our travel method. Bryce thinks as she's reading all this, quote, so many worlds, so many people, their children with them. Bryce is going to hyperfixate on this idea of children being food. And I think that's where we're going to start to see her moral obligation come into the picture and why she might be projecting moral obligations onto the princes of hell.
Yeah.
Bryce, if we think about it, was once a child who was raised to fear her biological father because he takes advantage of children.
Yeah. It's not great.
Not great, but it makes sense why she's so protective of children then.
Yep.
You know, she saw herself in a meal as a child. She empathizes with those in situations where they can't help themselves, like Syrinx and Lahaba, who in their own ways are like children, given their situations. At the end of the day, if you have to summarize Bryce, she's the defender of the defenseless.
Yeah, she is.
Of the helpless. You know, it's the children, the innocent, the enslaved. Those are the people that she's always going to protect. And I think that is what creates this turning point for her, where it doesn't matter what her doubts are anymore. She's got this massive obligation because of the truth that she holds. She's just like, okay, I'm all in now. Quote, these psychotic, soulless monsters. And then when Rigelus comes on the speakerphone, I'm going to fucking kill you.
That was great. That was a great rendition of italicized text.
Thank you.
We'll go into more of the moral obligations because, like, you can see where Bryce's morals start and where Hunt's, I don't want to say ends, but where they start to deviate. But I think what makes this scene so chilling is that it's like she's reading a menu. You know, like just kind of like a reminder of like, oh, you know, 2 cups of chocolate chips, not 1. Soften your butter. Don't use cold butter.
Yeah.
And because people, Fae, and company, they're nothing but food. And we've talked about this a lot in ACOTAR seasons. We talked about food is power, and it's not necessarily the same because it was used so differently there, but this is the ultimate food is power situation. And in my mind, I think SJM throws our world into the mix. Quote, denizens launched bombs at us. That planet left an inhabitants too full of radiation to be viable, left to rot in their waste. And there's even a quote later on where it's like, you should have seen some of these planets. Like, they were just destroying themselves. And I was like, oh, SJM. Okay. That's a little on the nose there, but whatever.
I definitely got the same vibes.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, she's talking about us.
Yeah. Felt called out.
Yeah.
I was like, well, I was going to say I recycled today, but no, I did. I always try. Let's continue. Make sure to recycle, folks.
So, chapter 73, we get into Rigelus's first monologue of the finale. And let me tell you what I thought. I felt like he was being the ultimate fuckboy. He is working so hard to gaslight Bryce. He is working so hard to make it seem like the Asteri are victims. You know what? You just can't bullshit the bullshitting queen, Bryce Adelaide Quinlan. She does not buy any of it. When Bryce asks Rigelus why do any of this, Rigelus responds, quote, "Why do you drink water and eat food? We are higher beings. We are gods. You cannot blame us if our source of nutrition is inconvenient for you. We keep you healthy and happy and allow you to roam free on this planet. We even let the humans live all this time just to give you Vanir someone to rule over. In exchange, all we ask is a little of your power." My thought, free-range humans. How considerate.
Yeah, I mean, again, I wouldn't be a good heroine because I'd be like, you know what? You make good points. We are happy. We are free. And you do just take a little bit of our power. So that's fine. I had to look up if SGM was vegan or vegetarian, and I couldn't find anything, but it was like, don't eat meat coded.
Yeah.
Again, I was like, he makes good points. Like, is anyone dying because of that specifically? I mean, a little bit, but like, you know, we can work a system out. Don't put me in here. I'm not meant to be in a fantasy book. Later on, though, we get this quote. "And so we have been trapped here, cut off from the cosmos, all that is left of our people." And it, you know, this is where, like, yes, they are giving themselves a major boohoo sob story. And the reality of it is that they're trapped. And if they weren't, they would leave it being Midgard. For the first time, they had to figure out a way to sustain themselves rather than destroy, drain, and bounce, which has been their MO to begin with.
And they actually have the perfect system, except for a few people who kind of figure it out, right?
Yeah.
They're just entitled little shits who are like, we can have every world that is full of magic, not just this one.
Yeah, I mean, they did come and like say, we're going to make our own little potluck, you know, BYO Faye, and just kind of, and just like come and, you know, have a nice little, like, you know, they bred them to be their perfect little prisoners. But it's like what we do with animals too. Like this it does make me be like, am I the problem?
It's the same thing that we do to cows. Like, basically the Fae are cows now for the Asteri.
I don't feel good about this. I'm not happy. What did I eat today? Okay, I'm not going vegan. I did my time. Rigelus tries to sway Bryce from making her feel as if she's privileged, right? He's giving her backhanded compliments like, quote, "Why do you think we allowed you to live this spring? You will undo the actions of one ignorant princess." And then another quote, I'm adding like a little flair. I mean, he's 17, so maybe it's like, in my mind, he kind of looks like Troye Sivan.
Oh, yeah. Okay. That was not my visual, but I like it.
You know, just like a little gay Australian guy.
Love it.
Yeah. So like, just imagine this like as Troye Sivan. You're so like Danica. I'm not going to do an Australian accent.
Okay.
You're so like Danica, a born liar. And then Bryce says, I'll take that as a compliment. So they're going back and forth. They're having a nice little conversation, even though Bryce is like, what are we doing here? Why are we having this monologue? Like, we've already been there, done that. But SGM has to get the story out. You know what I mean? Like, it's like sometimes things just have to happen, and that's okay. Bryce in this moment is back in sync with Danica. And she is basically saying, fuck all the confusion that she had before. I don't care anymore. It now makes sense when you think about the bigger picture. Because Danica understood the bigger picture. And we realize that Danica might have scented Baxion's power because Bryce is like, oh, that's how she scented Sophie. And maybe that's how she scented Baxion. Which I was like, one, what's special about his power? We still don't know anything about like his like special ancestry, which he makes a comment on, other than his like super hand chewing abilities. I don't know. And And then the other one is like, I was thinking like, well, that's probably why Danica even befriended Bryce to begin with, is that she smelled her power and went to go talk to her to figure out what was going on.
That's a great point.
Which I'm like, if SJM had room, I think she'd have wiggle room for that revelation and anger. Because that would be a hard thing to be like, oh shit. She probably even, I mean, I'm sure they're friends and everything, but she probably like went to even start talking to Bryce just because of the power she smelled.
Well, they started out as roommates. But yeah, the fact that Danica stayed associated with Bryce probably had to do with the power thing.
Okay, in my mind, she organized her being roommates with her. I don't know. Let's add problematic ideas that have nothing to do with anything.
During Rigelus' storytelling, he brings up an important point that I want to pin for us right now because it's going to come up by the end of the book. Rigelus tells Bryce, quote, "Your breed of Fae dwelled in a lovely, verdant land, rich with magic. Your starborn bloodline specifically hailed from a small isle a few miles from the mainland. The isle existed in beautiful, near-permanent twilight." So, in summary, there are Fae, and there are Fae shifters, and they're from different worlds. But what's important here is that verdant land. Specifically the word verdant.
Let's define it for us.
Lush and green.
Because she can't say lush one more time.
Which is fine.
Yeah,
but very green, very, nature rich is what I'm going to say. Which is an important breadcrumb for when Bryce lands in Prythian. But I'll come back to that when we get there.
One of the, I mean, it's a little respectable and admirable the way that like the Asteris had the Fae controlled for 15,000 years. That's a long time and that's impressive. Not good, but I'm just saying like their ways of controlling the Fae was working. And one of which is the way that they made sure not to unify the Fae, not to let them get close to one another. So the first step is you eliminate their commonalities, right? So the shifters are Fae, but then Bryce points out, like, but they don't have pointed ears. And Rigelus says, quote, "Oh, we bred that out of them. It was gone within a few generations." And then, just the aesthetic, like the fact that like Bryce was like, but our ears are different. Like as if that's how much value has been put on Fae having pointed ears, that she has to go back and have that be the first thing to say why we're different. Yep. And again, the concept of breeding, it's like animals. Everything is, I'm not saying I'm impressed by it. However, I'm impressed by SJM because, they bred the angels too, which like you can tell because that was the whole point with Celestina and Ephraim is that they're breeding. So it's like even the plot was having breeding be involved. So why wouldn't the Asteri have had breeding be part of their master plan? And it's to make them look visually different so that they can't recognize each other. And then finally, they're turning groups against each other. They're encouraging the speciesism. Rigelus says, quote, "Two breeds of Fae, both rich in magic, they were ideal food. We couldn't allow them to unify against us. The shifters easily and swiftly forgot what they had once been. They'd gladly gave themselves to us and did our bidding, led our armies, and still do." I just feel like he was like, yeah, the wolves, they're our bitches.
Yeah, I mean, to do that, you have to view these beings as lesser than you. I mean... We do it to dogs. We do it to cats. It's the same idea. They're sentient, but they're not at the same level as us.
Yeah. I mean, it goes and shows the idea of walking into that kind of trap willingly, like it's scary, right? It's freaky. And it goes back to like what we said earlier in this season when I talked about that one poem of like, first they came for so-and-so and then they came for us. And I think that there's something to be said, like that is like the theme of this overall book, right? Is that first these shifters are like, well, they're not after us, like they're our friends. And then by the time they might have realized that it's them, that they've been affected, it's too late. And now you're Danica and you're being killed. And
this goes back to the World War II themes that we were talking about earlier in the novel. It's very similar in concept to Nazi Germany.
Very.
Let's switch to happier things. By which I mean the Micah factor that we're playing with.
Go ahead. Tell me the happy thing, Amy. Because I see your note. Go ahead and read this happy little note for us.
This is me being facetious.
Okay.
So Rigelus lets Bryce know he manipulated Micah to kill Danica because Danica needed to be killed. And it was easy. Now, you don't have to convince me that he did this. I believe it. Because we're about to find out how he's used everybody as pawns. Makes sense. And I'm also convinced that Bryce would be pissed about this. Quote, they'd killed Danica to keep all of this secret. She would rip them to shreds. Nevertheless, I am exhausted of the Danica through line.
How many people can she like threaten to kill in honor of her?
Yeah, I mean, I know that's what makes Bryce consistent, and that's what you want in writing. Totally agree. However, I feel like it negates or dumbs down all the other complex motivations that we've seen bubble up in Bryce. Because I think it is more than just Danica.
I agree. It is not the sum of her parts. Is that how the phrase goes? She is so much more than this. Like, you know, I think when I first read this book, I was very much like, this is all about Danica. It's Danica 2.0. It's retelling the story all over again. And as we've been doing this analysis, I'm like, oh, actually, Danica doesn't have as big of a role as I initially felt like she did in my first read. But then we come back to this and it's like, okay, well, damn it. Like, there was character growth. Even if I didn't like some of the character growth, there was character growth. She's not defined by her passion for Danica, especially where one of my issues I think I brought up earlier in this season was that the Danica is a thing here, right? It's part of the conversation, but we lose that in book 3. I think that this is where that bridge shouldn't have been bridged, right? Like the holding on to Danica, that concept, just having that here, you'd expect it to be continued on to the next book because it is so like part of the through line, you'd assume.
I completely agree with you. I feel like we saw so much growth, even just in the last few chapters from Bryce and her motivations and the fact that she's fixated on how children are being used.
Yeah.
The Danica element here didn't need to be a motivation.
No, not at all. She did more for Emil in this book than she did for Danica.
Yeah. What is important about all of this, though, as I said earlier, everyone's a pawn and has been all along. And that's important to learn right now because we as readers should be asking, who can you trust at this point in the novel if everyone has been a pawn? And that's super important for the upcoming scenes because we think we have allies. We think our heroes have allies. And the fact of the matter is probably not. Rigelus even tells Bryce, quote, Micah killed her for us. Had no idea it was on our behalf. He was eventually caught and killed for disturbing our peace. I thank you for that. Even Bryce, without intentionally being a pawn, has been a pawn.
Did you believe it? The Micah part of this? The elaborate plot of we got Micah to go into the synth and then brought in Danica to get,
Yeah.
You did?
I feel like it was an easy add-on for SJM.
Okay.
I don't know that enough work was done to make it convincing, but it works nevertheless. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I guess. I think what is kind of hard for me is that there are these all-powerful beings and they feel the need to use one of their governors to have an elaborate thing to bring down Danica. You know what I mean? They make a comment at one point saying hey, you guys are you guys being Ruhn, Bryce, and Hunt. You're too big and popular for us to take all 3 of you off the street. That's fine. I get that. Danica's one person and she was already always in the line of fire. And you had one of the rebels people thought was going after her. It did feel like an add-on versus a thoroughly thought out point, especially when you think about the Asteri didn't know that Bryce had the horn until the very end, which then some of the synth things, I don't know. It just kind of makes it a little bit, it felt like an add-on, whether it made sense. I kind of that's always one where I kind of it's a little harder for me to chew.
It's a convenient add-on. I think there's nothing concrete for me to be able to say, no, this is incongruent with the first book. But I agree. I don't know that the work was done to make it convincing.
Yeah. So when Bryce leaves, because she's like, I'm going to kill you. Deuces, I'm out. Yeah. Bye. She comes out and Hunt is captured. Quote, his eyes turned wild, pleading, but there was nothing Bryce could do. And I feel like there's an extra tragic factor about Hunt's capture because of how underwhelming it is. And how quickly it happened and how we don't see if he put up a fight. We don't see how he was brought down. We just see him on his knees. I do like that. Like it stings seeing this strong man that we've gotten to know as Hunt kind of just waiting for her, already captured. Amy, what's that?
An ad break.
We'll be right back.
For over 50 years, Burlington's legacy has been great deals on coats for all weather conditions. So before you're caught unprepared for the winter weather, head to Burlington for name brands, quality items, and surprising fits for every family member. Stock up on coats, sweaters, and accessories before the cold hits, so you can finally stop avoiding the elements and start living comfortably. Warm up at your nearest Burlington location less than 1 mile away. Burlington. Deals, brands, wow.
This episode is brought to you by Allstate. Some people just know they could save hundreds on car insurance by checking Allstate first. Like you know to check the date of the big game first before you accidentally buy tickets on your 20th wedding anniversary and have to spend the next 20 years of your marriage making up for it. Yeah, checking first is smart. So check Allstate first for a quote that could save you hundreds. You're in good hands with Allstate. Savings vary. Terms apply. Allstate Fire and Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Northbrook, Illinois.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/campaign to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/campaign. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be.
What's up, guys? It's the champ, Sean O'Malley, here to talk to you about Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the best place to win real money while watching football. Run your game on Prize Picks.
Prize Picks will give you $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Just download the Prize Picks app and use code SPOTIFY. That's code SPOTIFY on Prize Picks to get $50 instantly when you play a $5 lineup. Prize Picks. Run your game. Must be present in certain states. Visit prizepicks.com for restrictions and details.
We're now in chapter 74, and Tharion doesn't stop to help Cormac. Instead, he listens and runs, and even I can't blame Tharion for this. Quote, he had 4 hours to reach water. The rebels would use that against him, and he might have sold his life away to the Viper Queen, but to live without his fins, he wasn't ready to lose that piece of his soul. Is that an unexpected thing? If you think about it, we've seen a lot this season of Tharion just really struggling to be like, I want to be a part of the above. But he also has that really deep connection to the Istros and his fins and his love for water because, like, you know, deep down, he is not 100% a land dweller. He is Mer.
Mare.
I know, but Mer.
I know. But it's spelt Mer, and it frustrates the crap out of me.
It does, yeah. Like, it's like, I see what you're doing. It's clever, sure. But, like, you know, Mer, if you're going to write Mer, I'm going to say Mer. I think that this is a good moment of seeing Tharion want something, though. And even as messed up as Tharion's choosing to sign up with the Viper Queen, you've seen 2 instances of him wanting to continue to live. Because as dumb as his decision was to sell his soul away for the Viper Queen, it was still done with the intention of surviving. And this is the same thing, right? He's doing this in order to survive. Tharion doesn't know what he wants entirely, and we can argue that his fins equals his true self, equals freedom, you know? We'll get a larger journey with Tharion eventually, but I think we're going to see a parallel here later with Hunt and when he gets his black crown back, and then Tharion being trapped with the Viper Queen.
Love it.
It's like, because you wrote some of these notes.
I did write this note.
You did. It was great. I was like, and yes, you're like, you put it in yellow. I shall take it. Yes. Cormac then explodes into a giant fireball to take down as many people as he can. And it's just sad. It's just like Sophie. Goodbye, Mac Daddy. You know, earlier this season, you were like, oh, his tattoos, word marks. And I was like, don't you fucking dare. Because everyone who was a Mac Daddy stan at the very end was like, please let him to have gone away and like winnowed away. But like, you know, he turned himself into a fire. I don't think you can winnow away from that.
I don't think you can either. I think you would take the fire with you. I do have a question. Do you think he tastes like cinnamon?
What?
Because he turned into a fireball whiskey. Tastes like cinnamon.
Go, leave. You're gone. You're done. We're out of this podcast. Corner of shame over there. You face the wall until it's your turn to speak.
Wait, it's my turn to speak.
It is. But I just, okay, first off, one, I was battling trying not to say something dirty. I just hearing my mom saying, don't make the cinnamon tasting joke, Jack, no matter how much you think Mac Daddy is hot, right? And then you go and you say that, and I'm like, maybe I should have made a cum joke. I don't know. Now I have it stuck in my head. Fireball. Do, 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 do.
I don't even know what that is.
I think it was when we were in college. Oh God, I don't want to say that. Maybe before we were in college.
I think it was before college.
It must have been before college. I don't want to talk about that anymore.
Remember how Rigelus showed us that everyone's a pawn? It makes sense then that when we get to Ruhn's point of view, he starts doubting Day because he's been caught and beaten. And quite frankly, us as readers might be doubting her as well because of what we've seen with Bryce and Rigelus. Ruhn thinks, quote, had Day betrayed him, pretended to be captured so he'd come here? He'd been so blind, so fucking blind. But also, why did you just now think of this, Ruhn? Never a question. He's just like Bryce. Head first, no thoughts. Or I guess in his case, penis first.
I mean, I was about to say it's still head first.
It's true.
Just a different head.
You know who we should not have been doubting this entire time? The Asteri and all their minions. Because, psych, this is when we learn just how intricate the Asteri's tracking was of all of our main characters. Mordok tells Ruhn, quote, I tracked you all around Lunathian. Rigelus was all too happy to hear about your activities. I have to say, I actually really appreciate this because I feel like SJM asked herself, what if nothing is as easy as it seems? Mm-hmm. What if my characters actually get away with nothing? What if all the consequences of their actions came all at once? Because that has been a big theme for this book is consequences, people not wanting to deal with consequences. Mm-hmm. And up until this point, there have been no consequences for their rebel activity. So for it to all show up at the end is a chef's kiss move for me. I also think this is one of the reasons why we feel that this ending is good. It's not just about the Prythian connection. Mm-hmm. It's the fact that SJM has subverted all our expectations for this book and that nobody succeeds.
Yeah. You know, I think when we as readers go into a book and we're thinking, you know, and we're reading it normally, right? And, you know, the good guys keep sliding their way through, never quite getting in trouble. We don't question it because that's like what you get in literature and in general storytelling, right? To your point, yeah, like this is what happens when, all those things that was easy, it was actually a trap. It was meant for you to set yourself up. It is very good. And in a book that has a lot of criticisms that we had and, you know, things that we would suggest to have done different, this is one that I think she definitely executed masterfully.
I agree with you. And, you know, on one hand, it's the second book in what we know to be a trilogy. They couldn't win, but I don't think we expected them to lose this bad, this hard.
Like, they didn't win anything. Like, it wasn't even like, oh, you can't win completely, but the heroes are still heading home to, you know, lick their wounds and they'll be back. It's like, no, what if everyone sucked so hard?
What if we took 10 steps backwards?
Yeah. What if we took 10 steps backwards and then jumped to the left and then just went down? The only person who walks away from this okay is Jac and Flynn.
But even Flynn gets emotional.
I love an emotional Flynn.
I thought also in the scene that SJM leaves a little interesting tidbit here. As we learned from Mordok, Rigelus subverted Lidia so that he and Mordok could work together, even though Mordok reports directly to Lidia. Similarly, the Harpy wants, quote, a head start before she, Lidia, ruins my fun. The Harpy continues, quote, surely you know a thing or two about that if you're sneaking around to report to Rigelus. What this shows us is that Lidia doesn't know how to have quote-unquote fun. It's a breadcrumb right before the big reveal that solidifies her goodness. She doesn't get fun the same way the Harpy and Mordock do, and doesn't let them go too far. Like, she keeps them tightly leashed.
Mm-hmm.
It does create a curious situation for me, and it makes me wonder, does Rigelus suspect Lidia, or does he just think she's all business and not, like, grotesque like they are?
Right? I don't think Rigelus will, like, ever fully trust anyone. You know what I mean? I think Lidia is, like, the biggest surprise for him. What we do know is that Rigelus was setting up a trap within the inner circle, of his own inner circle, of saying, if the team finds out, like, they're coming, then I know I have a person in here. I feel like he probably suspected Mordock over Lidia. Because, like, Lydia, they've had since she was a child, right? Like, she's been their puppet forever. But I do love your call out of the fact that, like, which I totally miss reading it every time, where it's like, oh yeah, she doesn't like torturing them. It's not fun. Maybe you listen to this.
She's good at it.
Yeah.
But she doesn't let the Harpy do her thing. Now, SJM, being the cruel, wicked woman she is, knows what she's doing and likes to remind us that Cormac is dead.
Yep. We don't...
By letting our characters think he's alive. Again, we just saw Cormac die. And in this scene where they're all captured, Ruhn thinks, quote, could Cormac get back here? He was their only shot at getting out of these chains, their only shot at survival. And this is not the only time it happens.
Yep.
Quite frankly, it does the opposite of hope, or it should do the opposite of hope if you're not hoping that he's still alive.
And that's the thing. It's hoping for the characters, which makes us extra not hope, because we're like, we know the truth.
Yeah, exactly. It causes despair. We realize if this is the only plan that they have,
they're screwed.
They are screwed.
Maybe they should have given Cormac a reason to live.
Maybe Bryce should have tasted his cinnamon.
Who are you?
I'm you.
I know. This isn't. Is this what it feels like to be in the presence of me? Because it's not fun. No, I'm kidding. You're great. You're hilarious. I'm not gonna. You know what I really want now is a horchata.
Oh yeah, it sounds really good. Actually,
gonna taste like cinnamon, and I'm gonna be like Cormac. We were talking about a meal.
Oh, were we?
No, not like that. We're talking. Amy. No. This is what happens when we're not recording next to each other. You're all sorts of loose. I was talking about giving Cormac a reason to live. And the fact that Bryce kept,
that's
like,
right. Got it.
Cock blocking him with morals. Like,
okay, yeah, that's right.
Right,
that's right. I forgot there was that reason to
we're
live.
here for a duty, and that's analysis. Take your filthy thoughts away from here. Bryce then goes full fae for Ruhn, for her brother, and even the Harpy notices it. Quote, does it bother you, princess, to see your males so roughly handled? I like the, your males with being her brother and Hunt, and we've made too many jokes along this. If you don't know what we're referencing, go listen to the beginning. It
sounds very sexual.
It is, stop making us want this, SJM. Stop it being like, and they were adopted the entire time. No blood relation. Monster. So they do target Ruhn in particular because it's going to torture Bryce to watch, but it's also going to torture Hunt because Hunt's trying to bait the Harpy to torture him. Quote, Bryce lunged against her chains, and Ruhn's heart cracked as she screamed, get the fuck away from him! And then this, get off of him! It's caps and it's italicized, so that's the best way I can do it. Get off of him! Bryce bellowed. A guttural roar thundered in her words, as fey as he ever heard his sister. Again, I do want to mention, though, that it's italicized and then italicized in all caps. And that is the use of the written language. That's using stylistic choices to get the point across. And we haven't seen Bryce lose it like this. We haven't seen her go italicized and caps, that's a bold combo. We've seen moments of her going fey, but as Ruhn notes, he's never heard her be this fey. And she's going to need that if she's going to go into Prythian. We also get a little bit of clues about Ruhn's past. Quote, the tip of the knife pierced Ruhn's throat, its sting blooming. He dove deep into the place where he'd always run to avoid his father's ministrations. We're going to get the reveal later of just how far his father really tortured him, but I think this is one of the best jobs that SJM has done when it comes to leaving little clues, little breadcrumbs throughout the story, all for this payoff later of just how horrible his father really was. Messed up, but writing-wise, great job.
Great job, SJM. Just before the Harpy can harm Ruhn, Lidia shows up, golden and swift as the wind. And I loved this little description because Lydia is constantly been described as golden. Great. But the fact that Ruhn described her as being like the wind, and for that reference to come back when he doesn't know she's day, it's just like, goosebumps, chef's kiss.
It's very good.
It's so good, and it's just a little clue that the Hind is in fact day before the reveal.
Now we're in chapter 75, and we get it. We get Lidia as day, Lidia, both one and the same. Quote, as her beckoning scent floated to him, a scent that was somehow entwined with his own. It was very faint, like a shadow, so vague that he doubted anyone else would realize the underlining scent belonged to him. We're getting more clues that they're mates, right? Like, this isn't just shadow sex. This is more than shadow sex. This is mate bond level. Do you think Lidia can smell it on herself? I mean, I don't think it's something that you can smell on yourself because Bryce didn't smell it on herself.
It's always struck me as something other people register.
I guess, yeah. So now we're going to see just how much Lidia was pretending, all the way to her voice. Lydia has covered up everything about her, and her voice is no exception. Quote, and she said with quiet calm, in a voice he knew like his own heartbeat, a voice he had never once heard her use as the Hind. And then I'm going to jump a little bit ahead. Quote, as the Hind, she kept her voice low and soft. Day's voice, this person's voice, sounded higher. It's kind of interesting that you chose higher pitch to be good and lower pitch to be bad.
I have a thought about this, and it's related to Pollux, specifically when we're in Hunt's point of view. He talks about the soullessness of Pollux's voice, and then some of the description of Lydia's voice is similar. Yeah. It's almost as if the low, flat, monotonous is meant to be
soulless.
Yep.
As someone who has a lower voice, I was like, excuse me, I don't appreciate this. I too can have a light, airy voice. Yeah, until then, we're the Hind, apparently. What's really unfortunate, though, is what do we always say? When people threaten women, characters, humans, whatever, it's usually threatening women with sexual violence. And Lidia and the Harpy are no exception. This is what the Harpy is saying to Lidia. Quote, the Asteri will let Pollux have at you, I think, a bitter, cruel laugh. Pollux, the male hood, a blaring white noise blasted through Ruhn's head. As we know, Pollux has not been good to Lidia. The Harpy's threatening to use Pollux as punishment, which implies that we know and she knows just how violent he must get with her. Because if that is her consenting, quote unquote consenting, then what does having at her look like if it's as a punishment? You know what I mean? I don't like to think about that.
I actively choose not to think about it.
But I do like to choose to think about how angry Ruhn is. That makes me happy.
Ruhn is instinctively very angry, and instinctively, he is also very in sync with Lidia. Despite the two having never battled together before, Ruhn knows Lydia's plan inherently when she nods at him. On her cue, he tackles the Harpy to the ground so that Lidia can kill her. As I was reading this, I'm like, yeah, this is awesome. But at the same time, do we believe it?
Great question. I think I am willing to believe this. I mean, I know we're supposed to get like the mate aspect of this. One, I feel like Lidia was very clearly setting up the Harpy to kind of get closer and closer. So I'm hoping that it's not too hard of a thing of like, hey, she's by you, do something. But to your point, it is like hard to say like, you know, yes, that's an easy thing to pick up. Like that is hard. But at the same time, we are freakishly in sync with a lot of things. However, we do have 15? No.
14.
Wow. Years of friendship behind us. But yeah, like, is it believable? But, I'm willing to get there.
Yeah, on one level, I think it's mate related.
Yeah.
On the other hand, I could also see it being she's a very skilled warrior and he leads the Fey division of the Ox. So maybe on some level, it's obvious what's happening.
I mean, I'm not a fighter and I caught that and I was like, ooh, look at me. I'd fit in. I'd do it. We then get a visual of Lidia covered in blood. And this is all despite her warning them, saying, hey, I'm not going to show up. I am not going to help you. But yet there she is, soaked in blood, decapitated the Harpy, who somehow comes back in the next book. And yet Cormac couldn't live. And Lidia goes against everything that she said that she would and wouldn't do in order to save Ruhn. And yet he doesn't give her the little bit of credit for that.
You can tell in the narrative that he's confused because one line says, Ruhn looked up at the hind. Then the next line says, Lidia looked down at him covered in blood. So he thinks of her in both terms as the hind, as Lidia, and he's trying to demonize her, but also knows that he can't because there's someone under that he loves. And he's very confused. He's a very confused boy.
Ruhn can't handle big boy emotions, is what we've learned. He's like, oh, big thoughts, big emotions, complexity, layers to humans. Can't compute. I only know 3 things.
I've spent 80 years partying.
Yeah. The mirth root's really gotten to him.
It really has. So what is Ruhn's tipping point? I think it's the fact that as Lidia is helping them all get out of their chains and whatnot, it becomes obvious that she was not willing to warn the team despite her knowing that they were falling into a trap. It's at this point, because the 3 pages leading up to this, he hasn't really consciously struggled with Lidia being the hind and being Day. It's not until this. Hunt mocks Lidia for not being willing to give up her position or her role, and she tells Hunt, quote, "There's a great deal that you do not understand." Ruhn then thinks she was so beautiful and utterly soulless. It's only then that Ruhn starts to refuse to talk to Lidia. She is soulless. Even though she wasn't soulless before, she's only soulless now because she let them get caught. She let them get to this point.
She didn't let them do anything. But yeah, it's...
Right.
I mean, I do agree. Sorry, go ahead. Keep going. I have so many thoughts.
Unlike Ruhn and Bryce, who charge head first, and Hunt to some extent as well, Lidia is strategic. And what we're seeing is she has learned to play the long game, just like the Asteri. Because Rigelus has been playing the long game for a long, long time.
Yeah.
I think it's also important that Ruhn was about to be tortured by the Harpy. He was mentally in a place he goes when his father tortures him. And although the hind or Lidia ultimately prevented it, she wouldn't have if it gave away her true allegiance. And because of that, I think Ruhn is connecting this feeling of torture, retreat, Autumn King, connecting it to Lidia, because if she had to, she would let it happen.
Interesting. You brought good points to this. I'm like, how can I defend Lidia to the very end? I'm
not saying Lidia is bad. I'm just saying this was not the time for Ruhn to discover this information. Lidia should have told him sooner.
You're right. Like, the thing is, Lidia should have told him sooner. I do think Lidia could have warned the team. I think Lidia is good enough at setting the Harpy up, setting Mordok up. Like, she could have set someone else up for failure to look like they were the spy and stuff, especially like, you know, she could have been freaking sleeping at the Asteri's feet when she warned him. You know what I mean? Like, she could have been very much there and seen. So I agree. Like, there's a certain level of warning that she could have done. But like, by warning Ruhn, that means she would have, I think, revealed her identity. In this instance, you could almost argue that Lidia chose her own identity in fear of that, then give Ruhn, you know, a heads up. If that makes sense. I'm not saying that she actively was like, you know, I'm more important, I'm not going to do that. But like, I wonder how much her identity of like worrying what Ruhn would think of her played into that, you know, versus like, I mean, and not just like, you know, my identity is important for being a spy and stuff. However, though, I do want to point out, because Ruhn, I'm like, all right, you need to calm down here. Ruhn says, quote, "Sophie drowned because of you." Ruhn growled, his voice like gravel. "People died at your hands." Ruhn, you didn't know shit about Sophie. Like, don't pretend like you suddenly cared about her.
Yeah.
That was okay. Did D people die at her hands? Absolutely.
He's acting like Sophie is his sister.
And it stings, like, like his, like, I'm willing to give Ruhn this moment alone he is allowed to have. Anything beyond this is just pure stupidity. But in this moment, quote, Ruhn looked away from her. He could have sworn the hind flinched. It hurts. She has her feelings hurt. Okay, care about that. Ruhn, are you listening, fictional character?
Despite Ruhn's insistence in ignoring Lidia, there continues to be signs that she is good, and that confuses Ruhn. We learned that Lidia used calling stones to save Sophie and then to save Bryce and everyone in Idra. But despite that, Ruhn continues to try to demonize her in his own brain. I also want to point out on page 774, Bryce is wearing sneakers. Good call, Jac. In the last episode, when Bryce goes to the archives, she's wearing black utility boots. So that is an editing error.
I love catching those. Feels good. Feels good. What's hard and absolutely perfect about this section is that we never are going to hear any of the characters actually say goodbye. They're only going to have little brief touches, some promises, especially between Hunt and Bryce. Like you're going to get some promises, and every little moment, every little hand graze, every little, pinkies holding or something, it's all a goodbye. And at this point, like everyone knows that. I think that Hunt is ready for like Bryce to get the hell out of there. And I think at this point, remind me if I'm wrong, Lydia's asked Bryce saying, hey, do you know what's in there? And Bryce said yes. I feel like at that point, Hunt and Ruhn, I don't know if Ruhn knows, but Hunt definitely knows Bryce can't stay here. Lydia knows that she has to get out. Well, no matter what, Bryce has the information. And so from the moment when Bryce confirmed to Lidia that she knows the truth, then Bryce became Lydia's priority to get her out, which then solidified, okay, we now have a chance of getting Bryce truly out of here.
Yeah.
It's sad, but it's sweet.
It is sad, but sweet, but sad. Ruhn, though, is still confused because it's all about Ruhn. Continuing the demonization of Lidia campaign, quote, her impassive, beautiful face, her empty golden eyes. It was a mask. He'd seen the real face moments ago, had joined his body and soul with hers days ago. He knew what fire burned there. It's also a nice little breadcrumb related to Aelin. Nevertheless, when Lidia tries to speak in Ruhn's mind, Ruhn builds a wall against it. And I got nothing else. I just am ashamed of him.
Lidia crying out for Ruhn when they're in the elevator.
Soul.
Okay, one, emotionally, that it hurts, right? It just hurts. But logically, if I was Hunt, I would be so pissed off and Bryce being like, wait a minute. Lidia was trying to talk to you and we could have figured out a way to get out of here, but you were too selfish and hurt to go, sorry, your girlfriend's hot. Sorry that she's got a little bit of baggage, but she's hot. So like, there's that. But like, it's so frustrating. I'm going on a tangent. I knew this would happen because it's like, he's putting everyone else at risk because he's not willing to communicate with her.
Yep.
That's so, get
immature.
Your hand chewed off. You deserve it.
Those are the consequences of your actions.
Honestly, I think he got let off too light. I think he should have lost a leg or something. I don't know.
My God.
I'm mad at him. If I was Lidia and like Ruhn at the very end, and like, mind you, he shoots her in the third book, which is frustrating within its own right. I think it would be like, I don't want to commit violence to someone, but it would be like, all right, point which appendage you'd like to cut off to apologize to me with. Oh, we already had this discussion. It ended up being a very dirty one. I'm going to move forward before we regress into our own chaos. So in the elevator, we have Ruhn, we have Pollux, we have Lidia, and we have a lot of possession. And even when Ruhn is mad at Lidia, he still feels protective of her. Quote, Pollux smiled at him, slid a hand around the hind's blood-splattered throat, and kissed under her ear. Do you like the way my lover looks, princeling? Something lethal snapped free at the hand on her neck. The way it squeezed, the slight glimmer of pain in Lydia's eyes. He'd hurt her. Pollux had hurt her again and again, and she voluntarily submitted so that she could keep feeding the rebels intel. She endured a monster like Pollux for this. Just note, again, the name choices. At the beginning of this, Pollux slid a hand around the hind's blood splatter throat. And then by the end of this, it was glimmer of pain in Lidia's eyes. So you have what Amy was kind of talking about, the flipping back and forth of this, is she Lidia or is she the hind? And he wants to be angry at her, which, I mean, he is, but he wants to completely ignore her, but he can't ignore the instinct to protect her, which some might say you shouldn't ignore it. Some might say you lean into it. Some might say that you talk to the one person who can help get you out of there.
Maybe if you lean into protecting her, she'll lean into protecting you, dude.
Yeah, something. Another thing I want to ask, though, is how much of Ruhn's frustration is his own anger at being part of the reason that Lidia had to submit to Pollux? Because she was feeding him intel. So what I'm going back to is the quote is that she endured a monster like Pollux for this. And I like to imagine when he thinks this, it's almost like this moment, him going in, trying to be the ultimate rebel, trying to get everything and being caught ultimately. And that's what Lidia has to endure. Then you also have this other quote here. How could he abhor her and need her and be drawn to her in the same breath? Again, he's really torn up and it's so easy. You just do it. You just like her. It's not that hard.
Just give up on being angry.
I think you just accept it and you let future you figure it out. That's what you do.
That's right.
But like to your point, I think you made a really good point that like Ruhn discovered this information when he was like ready to hide mentally. So you know what, you gave me that vision for a pass with him. But Ruhn knows that he knew that Lidia was high up, that he knew that, quote, Day was someone high up. He'd been a fool to think anyone with that level of clearance with the Asteri would come out without complications. At one point, he even thought that she might have been an Asteri herself.
Yep.
And yet the hind's too far.
Yeah. The quote is, he'd have been a fool to think, which means he wasn't a fool because he did think she was high up. But he's still acting like a fool because he's acting like he didn't know, even though he knows he knew.
But like he had been a fool to think anyone of that clearance would come out without complications. So it's like, he's like, wow, I'm an idiot for thinking that this would be someone super high up and would be a perfect, innocent person. I think with this also, if I want to view it with the feminist lens, is you can look at it as a woman doesn't come out without being this perfect, innocent soul, right? Lidia is messy. She has blood on her hands. And what's the Taylor Swift line all too well? Who's you want like jewel whose shine reflects on you. It's just the idea of like he wanted her to be some sort of way because at the end of the day, male gaze, and she wasn't that for him.
Yeah, I mean, what we're seeing is the male gaze has been broken.
And that's what it looks like.
And he's pissed because Day was not, despite everything he knew and understood, Day was not innocent. Day had complications and consequences.
He never paid attention. He never allowed what she said to be true. Because even though he, knew her soul, even though he knew everything about her, he didn't. And it was still the male gaze at the end of the day.
Yep, exactly.
And then, there's also this one moment here where I feel like you can also tell how in his head he is. And I feel like there's a selfishness to his own desire / revelation. He says, quote, what the hell did it even say about him that he was capable of feeling what he did for someone like her? It's about him, like it's not even about like, what does it say about me that I can like someone like her?
Instead of being like, what did she give up?
Right? Or that you're compassionate and that you can see someone for who they truly are and not the mask they have to wear in order to fight a war. I don't know. Another quote, his ally was his enemy. His enemy was his lover. He focused on the gore splattered on her. Lidia had so much blood on her hands that there would never be any washing it away. Ruhn sees Lidia as the monster she is, not for the person that she is underneath. Just like Lidia freaking said that he would. She called that. And that's why ultimately she has to die. I mean, it had to scare him. You know what I mean? And, she, quote, died for her sins in many ways.
Yeah, she does. It's SJM. Everybody comes back to life.
Unless you're Cormac.
Most everybody. Yeah. I want to point out that at this point in the novel, Bryce thinks several times that the Asteri are parasites. And I point it out because it's important that that word is introduced now in Sky and Breath because it feels appropriate, right? The Asteri are parasites that feed on worlds. It feels fine. It feels normal. However, when we read Flame and Shadow, the use of the word parasite felt really jarring. That there's a parasite that the Asteri used to diminish the magic of the Fae. If we think about it in the context of the Asteri are parasites, we've made that association. Hopefully, I'm crossing my fingers. I don't know if that context will make it feel less foreign and jarring when I read Flame and Shadow, but who knows? Yeah. But I think strategically, SJM did include it here for a reason.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's just, I think we mentioned, you might have said it in another episode where the word parasite is just such a weird word in what is essentially a fantasy novel.
Yeah, because it's a modern world. It's a modern setting, but it's still fantasy.
Like, I can handle cell phones and I can handle TV. Somehow I can handle Sunball, but parasite, no.
Right. This is where I circle back on my point about Bryce and children that I made before when Bryce was figuring out the history of the Asteri. Bryce is thinking internally, I wish I'd called my mom and Randall. I wish I had made things right with Juniper. And then she thinks, quote, wished she'd lain low and been normal and lived out a long, happy life with Hunt. It wouldn't have been normal, though. It would have been contented ignorance, and any children they had. Their power would one day have also been siphoned off to fuel these cities and the monsters who ruled them. This cycle had to stop somewhere. I think this is what is key. Asteri feed on everybody, but they feed on children who are helpless. And nobody is able to help those children. And Bryce would have contributed to that cycle. She would have had children with Hunt. She would have allowed them to be consumed by the Asteri. And this is where she's like, it's got to stop. I might not be able to do it, but I hope my friends do, because it has to end now. And that's different from the Bryce from before, who's just like, I don't know, should we be doing this? Instead it's like, yes, we should all be doing this. We should all risk our lives for this.
It goes from like what's right to the cycle has to end. You know, there's no questioning of what's right or not. It is a matter of who's going to do it.
Exactly. Yet, despite thinking she's not going to be able to end the cycle, she hopes that her friends will. When Bryce sees Rigelus in person, instead of accepting that she might be about to die, quote, something feral opened an eye in Bryce's soul and snarled. And in my head, I'm like, oh, it might be the light of Thea. Or, you know, Thea's daughter that's in her. It's like literally the starlight in her opened an eye and was like, fuck you.
Yeah, yeah.
And before we go into the next chapter, just to note that Bryce sees the gate at the end of the hall before going into the throne room, which is important for the plot.
Clocked it. Thank you for listening to part 1 of this week's episode of Book Talk for Book Talk with Jac and Amy. Stick around for part 2, which airs on Thursday.
We encourage you to rate and subscribe to our show on your preferred podcast listening platform. We would love to hear your thoughts based on today's conversation. You can submit your comments to our forum at booktalkforbooktalk.com for a chance to have your feedback discussed during a future mini episode or a Patreon exclusive episode.
If you're enjoying the podcast, please visit our website, booktalkforbooktalk.com, to view our latest merch and learn about supporting the show through Patreon or Venmo. You can follow us on TikTok, Instagram, or YouTube at the handle Book Talk for Book Talk. Bye!
I gave myself goosebumps. How did I do that?
It's because, damn it,
because it's the last episode.
Yeah, and Anna's book wins at the end.
Without intentionally doing so, I feel like I'm being more performative.
No, we are, but we kind of need to be.
But I'm not even thinking about it. It's just like the act of being on a camera. It's just natural.
Just natural performer. So, Rigelus.